All right, welcome to our explainer. Today, we're basically becoming detectives. We're going to sift through the biblical evidence clue by clue to try and solve the really fascinating mystery of speaking in tongues.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The central puzzle is right here. On one hand, you have the book of Acts, which describes tongues as this big public miracle where everyone actually understood what was being said. But then you flip over to 1 Corinthians, and it describes a private practice where, and I quote, no one understands them. So, what gives? Are these two completely different things? Let's find out.
To get to the bottom of this, our investigation has to start at the beginning, right? With our first, and honestly our clearest piece of evidence, the foundational event of Pentecost.
Okay, so check this out. Here in Acts chapter 2, the evidence is pretty much rock solid. As this map shows, you have the apostles speaking languages they'd never learned before, and this huge, diverse crowd of foreigners from all over the known world hears the praises of God in their own native tongues. So our baseline, Exhibit A, clearly establishes tongues as real, understandable human languages.
All right, now let's travel to what feels like a much more complicated crime scene, the church in Corinth. This is where we've got to carefully examine the clues that create so much of the confusion we see today.
So, here's our first clue. The speech is directed to God, and no one understands. Now, you can see why this leads a lot of people to conclude that it must be some kind of private, non-human, maybe even angelic prayer language. It makes sense, right? But is that the whole story? But get this, and this is a huge piece of the puzzle. That speech back at Pentecost, it was also praise directed to God. They were declaring the mighty works of God. And yet, the human audience understood them perfectly. So this tells us the problem in Corinth probably wasn't the type of language, but the social dynamic. The speaker was addressing God, but totally ignoring the actual people in the room, leaving them confused.
Okay, clue number 2 from that exact same verse, the word mysteries. And you know, that word just sounds supernatural, doesn't it? It immediately makes you think of some secret heavenly code or something only the angels can understand.
But when we actually look at the original Greek word, mysterium, it tells a different story. In this context, it simply describes something that the hearer can't understand. It's not defining the language's origin as being heavenly, it's defining the listener's experience as one of confusion.
In this analogy, just nails it. Think about it. If someone stands up and starts praying fluently in Japanese and you don't speak a word of it, well, the meaning is a mystery to you. That doesn't make Japanese some non-human, angelic language, does it? No, it's just a foreign language to that specific audience, and that fits the situation in Corinth perfectly.
And you know what? The author Paul basically makes this exact same point. He compares tongues to things like flutes, harps, and, you guessed it, the great many kinds of languages in the world. He's grounding his entire argument in real, meaningful, earthly sounds, not heavenly ones.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what about the spiritual gift of interpretation? Doesn't that prove it's a supernatural language? Well, the evidence here suggests that the miracle isn't the language, but the translation. Interpretation acts like a bridge, built by the Spirit, to cross that understanding gap so that everyone can benefit.
And then there's the big one, the phrase tongues of angels. But if you look at the context, it almost certainly seems to be a rhetorical device, hyperbole. I mean, Paul also talks about having faith that can move mountains. He's not giving landscaping advice. He's using extreme language to make a point about love being superior. Tongues of angels fits right into that same rhetorical pattern. So, after looking at all the evidence, what's the verdict? How do we finally reconcile the public miracle in Acts with all the private confusion going on in Corinth?
Here's the bottom line. The evidence is really pointing to one single gift. The Spirit-enabled ability to speak an unlearned human language, but it's being used in two completely different contexts. The variable isn't the nature of the tongue, it's the audience. If the audience knows the language, you get understanding. If they don't, you get a mystery that needs interpretation. Simple as that. So let's just quickly recap what our investigation found. This table shows how a lot of common misconceptions get cleared up when you look closer. The idea that tongues in Corinth were non-human, well, that's countered by the fact Paul himself compares them to foreign languages. Mystery doesn't mean a magical code, just a meaning hidden from the listener. And speech addressed to God can still be for everyone's benefit, as long as it's interpreted.
So this verdict leads us to one final and I think crucial question that gets to the why behind the what.
Yeah, why would this even happen? It's a fantastic question, and the answer shifts our entire focus away from the what of tongues to the much, much more important why.
You see, the author's critique was never that the gift was fake. His real problem was that its use was disorderly and chaotic.
He hammers home the importance of self-control, of order, and of community. Speaking without an interpreter was selfish. It wasn't building up the community as a whole.
And that's really the heart of the matter. Ultimately, the entire debate over human versus angelic languages completely misses the point Paul was trying to make. The problem in Corinth wasn't the nature of the gift, it was the immaturity of its users. Because without love, even the most spectacular, jaw-dropping gifts are, in his words, just a clanging cymbal, basically meaningless noise.
In our next explainer, we're going to build on this foundation to investigate the specific rules for using these gifts in public worship and explore why order is so incredibly important. Hope to see you then.